Hi everyone, here's the Bookchemist once again, and as you may know if you've subscribed to my channel, I recently completed a project in which I reread Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon, a challenging novel, one of the most difficult and frustrating but rewarding novels of the 20th century, and the major work, what's usually considered a masterpiece of one of my very favorite writers, Thomas Pynchon. And I read it alongside you guys, some of you guys. I filmed a series of videos on my channel, 8 videos in total. I organized a sort of read-along and reading project, and those videos are all in a playlist which is on my channel, and you can watch it anytime you want, if for whatever reason you feel like revisiting that thing. Today though, I'm going to talk about Gravity's Rainbow more broadly. This video is meant for people who either have read the novel and would like to discuss it generally, or for those of you who haven't read it and would like maybe to learn something about it. You know, it's a review, you've read the title. What about Gravity's Rainbow? One thing I have to say, one thing you should probably know, besides all those things, the novel being difficult and challenging, and oh my god, it's so disturbing. The metaphor I came up with to describe Gravity's Rainbow, it's possible it was for an old video I filmed, or maybe it was for some kind of class discussion, who knows. The metaphor I came up with was the idea that reading Gravity's Rainbow is a bit like walking around a labyrinth whose walls are plastered with pornographic images, but they are not the fun kind of pornographic images. They are very disturbing and gross. And that metaphor still stands after my second read. It is a disturbing novel, make no mistake about it. It deals with the worst possible tensions and ideas in Western culture. It focuses on the last months of World War II and the first months of the peace that followed. And it is in many ways an exploration of the dark corners of the human mind. Sometimes I'm not saying that it reached the peaks of disturbingness of stuff such as Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho, but I occasionally had to apply the same sort of mind game in which I just supposed that what was happening was only happening in the mind of the character and wasn't really happening at all, in order to make the novel a little bit more navigable and to maybe quench the nausea a bit. This does not sound inviting at all, I understand, but also be aware that this is a novel that keeps, as all good literature does, it's so much more rewarding upon reread. Because, and this is an opinion I believe I first encountered in David Cowart's Thomas Pynchon and the Dark Passages of History, I'm sure about it actually. David Cowart mentions this thing, that Gravity's Rainbow, when you first read it, it seems to be, as I mentioned, a novel about the worst impulses human beings can indulge in, but upon rereading you start noticing the intricacies of its reflections and the beautiful way many of its passages are connected and the beautiful architecture that lies underneath it all. The most clear example of this is the way the novel basically has a sort of circular structure. If you've read it, no doubt you've noticed it. It's, let's say, the most clear manifestation of this architecture, but it goes well beyond that. It's so much more intricate and it's so much more rewarding on a page-by-page level. Of course, in order to appreciate that, even partially as I did, I'm not pretending I got the whole marvelousness of this cathedral of words. In order to appreciate a fragment of that, you have to read these 900 pages once and then again. One very good reason why you may want to do that, and there are actually several, is that it's hard to undersell how influential Gravity's Rainbow was. It's up there probably with Ulysses, I have to guess, in terms of very challenging novels that influenced the rest of the 20th century, even with writers that maybe are not, you wouldn't necessarily associate with Pynchon at a superficial read. I mentioned in the final video in that series how Michael Chabon, one of my possibly my favorite writer, and a very entertaining and enjoyable writer, is a huge Pynchon fan, and when one reads the Chabon's work closely, you can definitely see the Pynchon's influence there, even though the two guys do not necessarily write the same, with the possible exception of Telegraph Avenue. In my opinion, Telegraph Avenue is possibly the only Pynchonian novel in terms of style in Chabon's all over. But beyond that, be it Jennifer Egan, be it Jonathan Franzen, Pynchon's influence is so vast, it's very difficult to split it into lines of influence. It's just pervaded the whole of American culture, from The Simpsons to the most challenging literary works. Another very good reason, and one thing that it's probably not stressed enough in discussions of Gravity's Rainbow, is that for all that I'm talking about how disturbing and troubling and nihilistic the novel is at times, it's not like there's no hope in this book. And there are some passages in here of like staggering beauty. Sometimes you just have to reread a certain paragraph twice because of how beautiful it is. When you read about two guys falling in love in wartime London, or when you read about a poor child's last hours after a bombing, or when you read about two flying balloons chasing each other and fighting with pies. There are some memorable passages in here because of how hilarious they are, definitely some memorable ones because of how disturbing and gross they are, but people enjoy those too. Some very fun songs. Oh, and of course, endless quotable lines. The one on the million bureaucrats plotting death, some of them even know it being possibly the most famous one. Oh, and also if they get you to ask the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about the answers. Beyond that though, the way Pynchon discusses war and the way Pynchon discusses the state of economics and of capitalism in the 20th century, the way these systems of power are organized and are meant to reinforce themselves, it makes you think at the world in completely different terms. Whatever your political view, I think this is a stimulating read, and it's going to engage you in so many different ways. It has lots to say when it comes to personal relationships, but it also has lots and lots to say about the great systems, about, again, war as a continuation of business, about the relationship between nations and corporations, science and power, politics and control, and more. The only sad thing about all this, about this idea I'm mentioning that Gravity's Rainbow actually has a very strong emotional core, is that that emotional core I'm talking about is mostly concentrated in the novel's first two parts, part 1 and 2. Unfortunately, what happens with Gravity's Rainbow is that the more the novel progresses, the more challenging it gets. And usually it's the other way around, because as with every novel, a work of fiction can be challenging, but by the time you've read 100, 200 pages, the text has taught you how to read it. It's basic semiotics, and you should be able to crack its codes and its mysteries more easily as you progress, but Gravity's Rainbow is meant and its structure to get more and more frustrating, and it is so for very good reasons, and you'll discover those reasons within the characters' reflections and within their stories and the plot of the novel's events as you read the novel. But that doesn't change the basic fact, and I have to mention that as a reviewer, that yes, the novel's final two parts, especially part 4, are really tough, and that lots of the entertainment value in Gravity's Rainbow is to be found in the early parts, especially part 1. One question I've been asking myself is whether, now that I've reread the novel, I feel like changing my personal chart of my favorite Pynchon novels. It's silly, but I like to rank my novels. I'm nerdy that way, and I don't think I would. If I remember correctly, in that video I put Gravity's Rainbow probably 6th or 5th, and I believe that I would still rank it that way. I personally believe that I personally like Pynchon's later novels from Mason and Dixon onward so much more. I find them more rewarding, more entertaining, and more friendly when it comes to the author and the text relationship with the reader. More engaging, more understandable, better under all different ways. That is not to say that Gravity's Rainbow is a bad book, by all means, but it is as challenging and as difficult as I mentioned. And bear with me, be patient. I'm sure many of you are hardcore and do not care at all about the difficulty factor here, but I personally believe that I'm not just being wimpy when I say, oh, this book is too tough, it's not clear enough. It is part of what it is, and I believe you should definitely approach this book knowing what type of reading you are getting yourself into. Otherwise, you'll only be perplexed to no end. And again, do I recommend Gravity's Rainbow? That's probably the final question. That's the whole point. This is a heavy, challenging, problematic novel. If you are interested in reading it, you probably already are that type of heavy/hardcore reader who is into challenging classics or challenging postmodernism. I do believe that it's one of those novels that if you're serious about American literature, you have to read it, even just to understand how influential it was. If you're into postmodernism in general or experimental fiction, again, it's a must read. If you're just a reader who's interested in engaging text, actually I'm going to tell you a secret. With this reread of the novel, I noticed one thing I hadn't picked up before, which is that the 4 parts in Gravity's Rainbow are all up to a point sort of independent. What I'm going to suggest is, if you're on the fence about reading Gravity's Rainbow, maybe you're scared about the difficulty factor, maybe you're not sure it's the kind of book kind of book for you, maybe you've read some other Pynchon and you're not sure whether you're ready for this, read part 1. Part 1 is something like 120 pages. It's not that long at all, and it is kind of rewarding by itself. Not in terms of it has a self-concluding plot, but you get to experience some very interesting characters, some excellent reflections, and part 1 is nowhere near as challenging as the rest of the book. If at the end of that part you're interested and hooked and you feel like carrying on, by all means do. If you think that you've had enough, maybe put the book aside and come back to it another day. There's no shame in that. For its very nature, once again, it's difficult and challenging and very disturbing. This is not the book for anyone, and if it's not the book for you, it doesn't mean at all that you're not a good enough reader. It just mean that you're not the reader for this sort of book. I read it twice somehow, although it's not clear how much of it I got, but there are so many other challenging books out there that I'll never be ready to read. And my voice is leaving me, so it's time to conclude. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you're going to read the book, maybe consult those videos I filmed. Hopefully they'll be a tiny bit useful, even just they're going to give you maybe some support as you read the book and some encouragement. And in a second I'll put links on the screen to others of my videos, maybe that ranking of the Pynchon novels and maybe some other stuff. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye guys.